So, we don't have a host, so I'll do the intro. But yeah, we're talking about Unity Catalog upgrades. In particular, we're talking about the UCX, the Labs project. So I am Vuong and Liran.
Liran, nice to meet you.
So, quick introduction about us. So I'm Vuong, I'm a lead solutions architect, Databricks, work in the Asia Pacific region. Have done quite a lot of work on the platform, but also have contributed to a lot of open source projects, so including projects like the Terraform provider, and I think particularly today we're talking about is UCX.
Sure. Liran, I've been a Unity catalog product specialist pretty much from the onset, and started with Vuong and others the UCX project to automate the migration process. So
yeah, UCX, when we talk about UC migration, and I'm sure a lot of people would have heard about that. That has been ongoing, for a long time, right? Moving from my Hive Metastore to Unity Catalog. We want to talk about four things today, right? Mostly motivation. Why did we actually build the toolkit? Why do we build UCX to support migration? How do you then actually start preparation, right? How do you actually execute the migration with the capabilities in UCX? And then how do you make sure that it actually works? So a little bit about the motivation. Obviously, why we want to migrate to UC. Obviously, best of Databricks is built on Unity Catalog. I'm sure in the keynote tomorrow, there'll be a lot of topics. We having a lot of capabilities, a lot of features that get unlocked. I think the latest one that literally got the release note, like today or yesterday, was the attribute-based access control. So we're actually now having that available, which I think basically means if you want to take the advantage of Unity Catalog, right? You need to, of Databricks, you need to move to Unity Catalog. Everything, around system tables, be able to do data sharing, in-place sharing, data, having AI governance capabilities, having that lineage, track, and all of that requires Unity Catalog. So obviously, we need to do that, right? And normally you see, you've got Hive Metastore, right, where your data reside. It's a two-level namespace. It's under a schema. And it's workspace specific, and then you move into Metastore. So part of that is, the first step you need to do is migration of the groups, because groups originally are workspace local objects. When we talk about Unity Catalog, we're thinking in terms of account-wide, because these have to be cross workspaces. So first we need to make sure these workspace local groups become account level. And then we need to then move out, do the migration of the data as required, right? Sometimes, especially if data sit on like DBFS root, you need to move that as well. And then once that's done, we basically need to make sure our data has the right metadata that gets migrated. So metadata that sits in Hive Metastore, that are legacy, that are workspace specific, needs to move to UC. And then finally, once we move all the metadata, we need to make sure our code are refactored, right? Instead of referring to two-level namespace, it should be now referring to three-level namespace. These are theories, right? But we realize that's a lot of work. So when you think about it, right, you have potentially tens of, or maybe hundreds of workspaces. There are thousands of tables, of views. You have lots of jobs, lots of notebooks. And there are code changes need to happen. You need to make sure these are done in an iterative manner. So you need to be able to plan all of this. And actually doing this manually, almost impossible. And trying to do this in a more programmatic manner, yeah, cool. But obviously folks come up with their own things. So, which is why we're talking about UCX, or a reintroduction, because this has been around for a year or so, a bit longer. So when we talk about UCX, why is it UCX? The name is called Unity Catalog Upgrade Toolkit, but UCX because it's cool, right? Everything that ends with an X is a cool product. In a nutshell, it's a Databricks Labs project. It's developed in-house by field engineers, so including folks like Liran, myself, and there's quite a few other contributors to it as well. We've been keeping this project up to date, fixing a lot of bugs, adding new features. And the key capabilities that we have added, right, it's the assessment capabilities, which is inventorize the entire existing Hive Metastore and gives you an indication of how to migrate. Doing what we talk about, right? Group migration, making sure all the the foundation objects in Unity Catalog are registered, making sure we can do the table migration and then the code migration, and there are additional utilities as well. And it's been quite a successful project. You can see the adoptions across the customers. Right? We're talking, a few hundreds of customers are using this to support their UC migration, and we're also getting quite a lot of stars on GitHubs, etc. Everyone likes stars and forks. And I think giving one of the success story, right? We're talking a customer migrating roughly 600 workspaces, which is a lot, right? Lots of business units, and they were able to complete the migration project in just about over 6 months. That is quite an impressive pace without automation, without having toolkits like that. I don't think it would be possible to do so. So let's talk about preparation, right? What we need to do. Firstly is installation. So obviously, how do we install UCX? It's available via the Databricks CLI. So actually, when you install Databricks CLI, it actually has a labs group command, and it will actually be a Databricks labs install UCX. So we can get the video to play, but otherwise I can narrate what it does. But effectively is an interactive prompt, right? You install Databricks CLI. I would say if you ever work with Databricks, you need to do anything programmatically. Databricks CLI is pretty much the way to go. And you run Databricks labs install UCX. It will ask you a series of questions, and you can iterate through that. So effectively, it would ask you, what are the workspace, what are the profile for authentication purposes. It will then deploy the UCX library, and all right, this is working, right? So basically, it would, because UCX is a Python library, so it will start the prompting, right? Giving some naming conventions, for example, what schema do you want to store the artifacts from UCX? Any logging we want to do? And there's a lot of defaults already set, right? We want to do threadings. How do we upgrade the groups doing the upgrades? Do we need to scope our migration to only specific databases? Do we want to skip the migration of some objects? And if you think about it, right, the assessment is probably where most folks have been using Databricks Labs UCX for, because it gives you essentially inventory of all the Hive objects, right, the tables and the views, the UDFs, including also the access control list that that was the legacy version, right? We call it the legacy table ACL. And we also inventorize all the workspace objects as well, right? And we use the API to programmatically go through this. So all the workflows, all the clusters, all the compute resources, the queries, the dashboards, because again, think of the need to rename some of these 2-level namespace objects to 3-level namespace. And once we start running the assessment, UCX will actually deploy a assessment job here, and the assessment job here actually has dependencies of a lot of objects, right? First we crawl like the tables, and we want to crawl the grants, we want to crawl the workflows, and then we will then summarize all of that in a dashboard. So this dashboard, easy to look at the entirety, right? How many tables have we captured? How many credentials, right? How many jobs have we inventorized? And all of this give you a quick overview of how much effort it requires. So you can see here, right? And out of the objects that we inventorize, it also gives us an overview in terms of what patterns can be used to migrate, right? If you have a table that sits on DBFS routes, that's probably more effort to migrate than if you already have an external table that sits in S3 location. And it also go through the code, identify potentially any compatibility issues, because as you're aware, moving to Unity Catalog also means moving to the new access mode in Databricks, right? It's not a no isolation free-for-all anymore. And you can see here lots of details that allows you to step through your migration, right? Going through the 1, 2, 3, 4 steps as we do. And there's one more thing that I want to highlight, right? Is we actually look at this and try to estimate a t-shirt sizing in terms of effort. As I mentioned, right? Delta table that sits already on S3, slightly easier to manage than, let's say, tables that are on DBFS in a Parquet format or something. One more thing to think about is when we're now moving from tables that sit in Hive Metastore that are scoped to single individual workspace, we're now moving to tables that sit in Unity Catalog. So these will sit across all the BUs. Actually, how do we map that to the structure? So one of the things that we ask users to do is, how do you map the source to the destination, right? Because think, again, look at that picture, right? We have 2-level namespace in Hive Metastore. We're now moving to 3-level namespace in UC. So where does that sit, right? Are we moving table as is to a new schema that sits under the catalog? Or do we want to do some reorganization? Like, are we cleaning up our houses? And this is quite useful. And what we've seen is a lot of customers have done the assessment and they got a good view of the effort and they start going through the UC migration. And that's where we see the execution. It can be opinionated because it depends on the scenario, depends on user level. There are different ways people approach the problem. I think our opinionated approach is that UCX has a lot of capabilities. It has a lot of tools on how to sequence the actual execution. So I'll hand over to Liran to talk about this opinionated way.
Thanks, Vuong. One thing I want to mention is when you install UCX, it asks you a lot of questions. And typically, when it asks you the questions, you're not at a point to provide all the answers, specifically if you do it for the first time. Don't worry about it. You can guess, like a lot of, all of that can be then fixed in the configuration file. So let's talk about how you actually execute the migration. So the first thing you do is the group migration. Group migration, there's no really other way to do other than using UCX. The idea that we're moving from workspace-specific group to account groups, that part is simple. It's specifically if you use something, if you import the groups from external repository like AAD, this is pretty simple to do, to remap it to the account. Where it gets more complicated is that all the internal objects in the workspace are mapped to these groups, the permissions, and it's very hard to the point of impossible to actually explore all the places where you reference these groups to remap them to the account groups. And that's what we do with group migration. We list the existing permissions. That's all done automatically using the same workflow. We create the account groups for you. That's optional, whether you want us to create it or you want to create them yourself. And we can make the same groups with the same name, or we can create mapping. We have cases where you want different groups. You move from a condition where you have in dev workspace, QA and prod the same name group but used differently, to a place where all the groups are in the same repository, so you may want to prefix them or suffix them, and we're allowed to do all that. We validate the account group, so we run validation, and we can run validation on nested groups. So we run validation, make sure the membership on the account group is the same as the workspace group. We rename the workspace groups as a backup. We remap all the permissions, and then we get rid of the workspace groups. That's all done automatically by group migration. This is by far the most tried and true elements of UCX. Let's talk about table and views migration. So we have now two options, and that's new. That hasn't been the case last year. We have now two options for migration to have in mind. One is the traditional, the table migration. We call it bulk. It's not a great name. You can do it iteratively, but essentially this is where we migrate the tables from HMS to UC. We will show you exactly how we do it because it's different from managed group, managed tables, external tables, delta or non-delta. We have all this determination. The next option that is available, and we could call it incremental, is HMS Federation. So now UCX allows you to turn on HMS Federation and migrate the HMS catalog into Unity catalog as one-to-one. We don't offer mapping there, so all the names remain the same, the schemas and tables names remain the same, but it is an in-place upgrade. Now, when do we recommend using HMS Federation over traditional UC migration? If you have a case where you want to get on UC fast, you don't want to touch the existing code, or you have upstream processes that are too complex to migrate, and you want to leverage a lot of the UC capabilities downstream vis-a-vis SQL, Genie, all the new features, you can use HMS Federation. And what is new is that we allow you to migrate it incrementally. So first migrate all the tables, all the downstream processes, AI, BI, dashboards, all that to UC, and only later upgrade your ETL to UC. We have an option, a button on each individual table, upgrade in HMS Federation. So that's new for you. Right now, obviously, we migrate tables, we migrate views, we repoint the views to the new location of the table as well. Let's skip. Okay. So this is kind of the mapping of what we do in table migration. We have a lot of strategies, as you say. We figure out if it's an external, it's managed. If we need to copy the data or just copy the metadata, whether we do sync, whether we do deep clone. We have a lot of options. All these options are managed by the workflow. If you have a case that you think we don't cover, reach out to us, because it may be covered and you haven't surfaced it, or we may even customize it for your need. We try to cover all the migration cases for tables, but we may have missed some. All right, so this is the workflow that migrate the tables. As you can see, yeah, you don't see great, like I should have.
We're running a workflow right now, right?
Yeah, like I'm running the migrate table workflow. And as you can see, not great see, but like each one of them is a migration, is a task that migrates a certain type of tables. So you see it's very elaborate, and at the end of it, we update the migration status. I'll touch on that soon. Next slide. Yeah, let's, okay, that's fine. So the next thing is that's how we migrate to federated. It's a single command, migrate to federated. We allow you to migrate from workspace groups, from workspace HMS or from external HMS. We support Glue, MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres. And in this case, I migrate from Glue. I specify the Glue. For Glue, you have to provide a service credential. And now I create the location for the new catalog. And that's a nuance in HMS Federation. And you will see that once it's created, I can go and, is that next slide? Yeah, let's skip the next.
I think.
Yeah, you can see here that the new catalog was created, and the catalog has a one-to-one depiction of what you had in HMS. I didn't have to specify mapping to tables or anything like that, and I can access the HMS tables directly. Yes?
I think this is a game changer, right? Because if you still have legacy Hive Metastore, this is the new and better options, because it allows you to effectively switch all your downstream to start using benefit from Unity Catalog features, things like AI, BI, Genie, even some of the more ML-focused workloads, and then allows you to then incrementally upgrade your ETL. I think that's probably the biggest change.
Yeah, that's the biggest change from last year, from when we presented it last. All right, next slide. Okay, code linting. Once you migrated all your tables to HMS, we're linting the code, or we have to migrate the code. So the way we lint code, we have two main options. We can lint existing workflow, or we can lint static code. Static code as in code in your Git repository, SQL queries, libraries. So we can look for code in jobs and dashboards, in notebooks, in files, in wheels, in eggs, cluster configuration, and PyPy. we create a graph, it's internal process, we create the relationship between all that. So if you provide us a notebook, we will not stop at linking the notebook, we will go into the library or other notebook it references and we'll surface them. And finally, we will link and we will show you all the problem in the code. Okay, next.
So what are the examples, right?
Oh, yeah, so yeah, like I list a few examples. The JVM, if you access the JVM directly, if you have direct file references, we will highlight everything that might not work with UC. This is an example. In PySpark right now, this is the state of it. And again, I'm not sure it's gonna change soon. We haven't decided yet, but we will highlight all the references that you have to, that are two levels namespace, and we'll tell you what table you have to change it. On SQL, we will change it for you. On SQL query or dashboards, we will change it for you. We will back it up and you don't have to touch it. Next. This is some more, I would say, involved examples where you reference a file, a table name that from a prompt or something like that. So we will highlight that and you will have to change it on your own. Next. And the last one that we're working on, and it should come later this year, is an update external reference, external file reference to the table that hosts this location. And this is especially important now that we encourage everybody to move to manage tables. This will be used for when you migrate from external to manage table, regardless of HMS to UC. So we will use the same function.
I think, yeah, because we're switching now from paths to table references because we are decoupling, right? You want to be path independent, effectively. Your tables should be what you refer to. That's how you grant your permissions. The underlying location is a function of the platform that will then handles the management and the optimization of that, because essentially the layer that would dictate how the table maps to a path is Unity Catalog, right? Unity Catalog should be the source of truth. You shouldn't try to go to the path and directly go to the tables.
So we are fixing SQL that is embedded in PySpark and SQL that is independent of PySpark. We do both of them, and right now again we're offering linting. In future version we will offer fixing. Fixing is a little complicated because the table name is not always listed outright in the code. Sometimes it's in a variable, all that kind of stuff. So that makes it more difficult. All right. Finally, and this is something that is relatively new, but is very powerful, is we have the concept of validation. We have, right now, it's an experimental workflow that essentially is doing reconciliation. The concept of reconciliation is to compare the source table to the target table. And there are a few cases where it is desirable. In many cases where you have an external table, we just reference we just copy the metadata from HMS to UC. Reconciliation doesn't make a lot of sense because it's the same table. If it's delta, the metadata is in the table and not in the catalog, so it doesn't really matter. But cases where it is not delta, or if it's managed table on DBFS root, and we copy the table to UC, and you forgot to turn off the upstream process, or intentionally you keep both systems alive, the reconciliation will alert to you when the source and the target become estranged. And these are the tests we are running. We are checking for the metadata, and we provide you reconciliation of the data itself. And you can set the threshold, you can look for sampling, or you can look at every single record. We're doing it by checksum. It's pretty efficient. We run this process on a nightly basis, and we give you a report on how much your migration progressed and how many tables are the same or not the same. So the idea is that you will not migrate all at once, rather you will have a rolling migration, and every night you will get a progress report to see how you're doing. Finally, these sanity checks have nothing to do with UCX. It is on you to check that UCX and your processes are all fine before turning off HMS. Do all the workflow run successfully? Are the dashboards there and available to your customers? Right people have access. This is something that is very important because it's a big break from the way HMS and HMS security works. And who owns the newly created object is kind of important. It's a concept that's not available prior to UC, but who owns is very important. It's important that the ownership will be assigned mostly to groups and not the individual, because there are certain, that has changed lately. We added the manage permission, but before we added the manage permission, ownership was very fundamental. So it's important to understand, you do all these sanity checks before you disconnect your HMS.
Which is quite relevant because we now have ability to completely turn off HMS as well in a workspace. That was a long time in waiting as well, right? Before you complete your migration, you need to make sure that no one keeps writing data to Hive Metastore as well. So you want to turn that off. So that is now also available. So it's a little things that basically make the migration now a seamless end-to-end journey.
All right, few special consideration, few things that secret thing that we wanted to share with you is no migration happens in isolation. So when you migrate, you have to think about migrating the tables, migrating migrating the related views. You migrate multiple notebooks, you migrate the codes, and you migrate the jobs that are related to this code. And finally, you repeat that in multiple workspaces. So click over. And that's what I described before. The migration study progress dashboards is what gives you a view of how your migration is doing across all your workspaces. It's an experimental, and we hope you can participate with us in getting it mature. So it's an experimental workflow that right now is disabled when you install UCX. All you have to do is enable and play with it, and you will get this beautiful dashboard. All right, let's talk about roadmap and what's coming. And we have small enough group, so I'll run quickly through that, and then I want a little bit hear from you what you want and what worked for you, what doesn't work for you, and where do you want us to head next, because this is something that we contemplate. The migration progress report that's already experimental is the first thing. The direct path lookup that I described is something that is coming later this year. Next. The converting mounts to volumes, controversial feature, we're working on it. And finally, AI and ML assets. Right so far, we barely touch on AI and ML assets upgrade. We're going to tackle that next. And finally, okay, one more thing. This is secret between us and you that joined us here. All right. There's a little tidbit, a little secret in Unity catalog, in UCX that ships with UCX. We call it the debug notebook. The debug notebook is there when you install UCX. It allows you to run UCX from a notebook and have access to all the UCX context and all the features of UCX. It's really, really cool. I have an example here. I can share the example with you. It gives you access to all the facilities we have with UCX from the command line, and you don't have to worry about logging in or running it from your laptop. And it was used there originally for debugging or troubleshooting, but it can be used for much more. I'm showing you here a customer, I think you might be even in the room, that requests us to update manage table after they were upgraded for a little while. So we created this code using the UCX, but using the debug in a notebook. And the code that would have been, I don't know, few pages ended up being, half of it is importing, so really like 8 lines, and I scan all the tables, I see what is the source, what is the target, and I keep them in sync. Very, very easy to do. You can do a lot of things. You have access to all the migrated table, migrated assets. You have access to a lot of facilities. Everything that you see in assessment, you have access as an object in the context. It's very simple. We can provide you example. You can reach out to us for more idea. The most important thing is to copy the notebook out of the folder. It's in the application folder and under UCX. The reason is if you will change it there, next time you install UCX, it will be overridden. So copy the debug notebook before you use it. And handle it with care. With great power comes great responsibility. So make sure you do that. Finally, this is how you get UCX again. This is a link to the new documentation site. This is how you start, how you engage with UCX. From there, there's a link to the GitHub page if you want to look into the code, or if you have aspiration to use this code for other things. And that's what we had. Any questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.